Thank you, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to be speaking about a very familiar topic, which is anger management and strategies to improve dysregulation and optimize the ability to cope with that. This is a topic that obviously is going to encompass a lot of practical tools that I hope will be helpful for everybody. And just to get started, I'm going to review some of the topics that will be addressed within this discussion. So this will include understanding emotional dysregulation, what potential triggers can lead to someone's dysregulation, the importance of self-care, how we optimize our abilities versus focusing on the things that we struggle with. I've also provided some different scenarios, but at the end, please feel free to offer your own scenarios, or if you would like some specific strategies. And also, I will be talking about how, in order to get a change, we have to make some changes. So when it comes to emotional dysregulation, this can look different for different people. But one thing that we know is that we don't have that sense of calm when we begin to dysregulate. So this can look like someone being extremely angry, someone very angry or enraged, someone that's extremely anxious. It can look like excitability. It can present itself in many different fashions. And oftentimes dysregulation encompasses a combination of emotions happening all at once. And when this happens, when there is this dysregulation, this lack of calm that sets in, it causes our behavior to change. So people look at the behavior often over what the emotions that are driving that. And we will talk about the complexity around why someone dysregulates and what can help. So the impact of emotional dysregulation when someone's experiencing it, it can look like someone could be very overwhelmed, very disoriented or confused, or just feeling misunderstood. I'm not being heard. Someone's not understanding me. So this can present where someone is perfectly calm and collected, and then suddenly they can begin to escalate, or someone else can completely escalate, where seems to be this like impulsive shift within their mood and behavior. When there's a combination of emotions going on, and some of the driving forces might be anxiousness or stress, or feeling unable to do something, there's a lack of confidence. It causes our brain to go into this overload. So it makes it very difficult to sort of think clearly within these moments. And then we can get very overwhelmed with our environment or the people within the environment. So those impulsive reactions are not something that are ultimately in the moment in our control. They happen. We have to try to deal with them to the best of our ability. And then everyone around us is also trying to navigate that at the same time. So when someone starts to feel overwhelmed, we know that it doesn't just impact our behavior, it impacts like our physical symptoms, it impacts our cognitive abilities, how our brain processes information, how we're able to calm ourselves back down. Those things often don't align. So someone can stay in an emotional dysregulated state for a short period of time or a prolonged period of time. The other issue is that after someone is dysregulated and loses that control, they can also feel these lingering emotions of either shame or feeling uncomfortable, embarrassed, things like that. So the difficulty in calming down, in regaining the control, I'm hoping some of the strategies we discussed today are going to help give people some alternatives, because that really is the most difficult thing. No one sets out at the beginning of the day to lose control and have escalations or breakdowns in their behavior, but they happen. And of course, there is a concern where, what do other people think? Our family, support people, our friends, are they understanding? Or are they just looking at the behavior and thinking, oh, this person just isn't able to control themselves? So ultimately, when we're not able to cope in a moment and there's breakdown within our emotional state of mind and our behavior, we need to utilize strategies and things that are going to help us feel better, regain control, and most importantly, be able to move forward. So if we start to look at what are possible triggers to our behavior changing, our emotional state changing. And they could be a multitude of things. I've only extracted some of the main ones, but this list is still small compared to what could ultimately also be a trigger. The other thing to keep in mind is that there's usually a combination of triggers that can also happen at once. So whether they're physical nature, where someone's in a lot of pain or discomfort, or they're just not in the right, position to help them communicate. If there's emotional things, if someone had like a bad day the day before or a terrible morning, and then they're going into another situation, those emotional factors might be impacting and impeding on their mind. Whether from a cognitive point of view, someone has a lot of difficulty with, memory, processing information, listening, retaining information, all of these things can also impact and set us off. Sensory challenges are one of the also main things that aren't always seen by someone else, but they're usually noticed by the individual. And that can look like whether it's extreme sensitivity to noise, if it's visual stimulus that's setting somebody off, if it's, the environment feeling too confined or enclosed. It could be temperature. It could be, again, pain sensors. There's so many different sensory aspects that impact our body and then ultimately impact our mind and our behavior. So those environmental factors, depending where we are, who's around us, also can influence how we feel and therefore how we act. The other thing is our past experiences, even prior to an injury, can also have created some type of trauma that is held with us. And again, it can be triggered depending on the context of situation that we're in, depending on who we're around. So as I'm listing some of these things, we can see it's like building blocks. All of this adds to the complexity of what impacts anyone's given behavior at any particular time. Sometimes people's behavior changes just based on who's around them. And it's not even necessarily always what someone's doing or not doing, but just the presence, and it could be someone very close to us, can all of a sudden shift our mood or our behavior. The way someone sees something. So perceptions is also very important, because what can be a trigger to someone is how they've interpreted information, how they've interpreted something being said to them or not being said to them. And those perceptions of interpretation can lead us feeling validated, can leave us feeling heard and understood, or the complete opposite. It can lead us feeling helpless and misunderstood. And that can lead to sort of frustration and escalations. When we look at self-image, how do we view ourselves, especially after an injury? Has our confidence and self-worth been impacted? Because if it has, at any given time, that can be triggered. It can be triggered again by the environment, someone saying something to us, or just the way that we're looking at ourselves can impact our mood. And the other thing as well that we don't want to minimize is underlying conditions, whether it's mental health conditions or other neurological conditions that make it even more challenging for someone to have control all the time and regulate their emotions. So these are just some examples of possible triggers that can lead to sort of, again, outbursts, or even some people are very inward. So they internalize everything. So they might not show the anger or anxiety outwardly, but it's all internalized. And that also can be quite problematic. So when we start to look at what is going to help, what can help with regulation and anger and managing anxiety and mood and all of these things. So some of the strategies and tools that can be helpful is we have to be mindful as an individual, or someone even gently reminding us, like, what are things that can contribute to that? Are you someone that has a lot of sensory triggers? So meaning just walking out the door and being subjected to noises and different lighting and people can be very triggersome. So we have to make sure that there's strategies set up before you even leave the house. If we look at things like your day-to-day sleep hygiene and knowing that, am I tired? Because when we're tired, for any of us, it makes it even harder to manage our emotions and regulate. So we also look at fatigue, not just from like a physical perspective, but are we emotionally depleted on that particular moment or that particular day? Are we cognitively completed because we've kind of overdone it? And then we have to figure out, how are we going to manage this? So by monitoring physical and emotional changes in ourselves and what that looks like, we might need to pace our day, take the necessary breaks within the day so that we have the reserve to manage our body, our mind, our emotions, our behavior, because they're all tied in together. Some of the things I'll be talking about specifically are around some grounding techniques. And what works for one person might not work for somebody else. But some of the suggestions, whether alone or in combination, the grounding techniques sort of reshift the attention of our brain in that moment to help us feel a little bit better without thinking so much about it. Because oftentimes when people are like, well, just change your behavior. And my question to someone that poses that question is, how hard is it for you to change your own behavior? Never mind putting the expectation of someone else changing theirs. So ultimately, what is important is that we focus on what we actually can do. When someone says, I can't do anything, this is just how I am, I challenge that. I'm like, well, let's start with what you can do, what you want to do, and let's build from there and what that looks like. So if we look at some, and this is again just a small example of the many of different grounding techniques, there's sort of standardized grounding techniques that some therapists will suggest, where they say, okay, if you're in an environment, see 5 things that you can focus on, those types of things, which for me, grounding techniques have to be very customized to you as the individual. What is going to help you? So for some people, what becomes very helpful, even from when the start of their day, when they get up in the morning, is putting on some music, maybe have some meditation in the background. For other people, that they just want quiet. And that becomes a bit of a grounding technique, is having more of a softer, gentler environment. Noise canceling headphones can be very helpful for some people because you can control noise that's around you that's not in your control. Whether it's also touching something that's of comfort or something that provides some tactile stimulation back to help someone regain, shifting their thought process or regain control. What we look at, what we listen to influences our mind, which influences our mood and therefore can influence our behavior. So grounding techniques for some people might be like, I need to wash my face with cold water to reset. For someone else, it might be, I need to go for a few-minute walk for fresh air. For someone else that doesn't have easy access to do some of those things, they might have to have something in the background, like an Alexa going off, playing some music, doing a meditation, doing some deep breathing. All of those things are grounding. Tapping is another grounding technique, rubbing our hands together. So things don't always have to be complex, but it's finding ways. Do I need to put a mint or a spicy candy in my mouth to help my brain settle down? Because all of these things that we do to shift the attention off this emotional high or low helps our brain reset. And that's one of the purposes around grounding techniques. The other thing that I think is very important when we're talking about managing ourselves is, what does your daily self-care look like? And that's probably one of the most imperative things, is how we're taking care of ourselves, the consistency behind the self-care. So that could be very simple as getting up at a certain time every day, going to bed at a certain time to make sure you have enough rest and sleep, especially if your sleep's disturbed. What does your day look like? By scheduling our day, whether we can write it out, we can have it voice recorded to us. If it's more comfortable to have someone dictate it to you, becomes really helpful. It helps us achieve the goals, whether it's productivity goals or goals within ourselves, by managing our emotions, by managing how we communicate, using more of our words, less of our behavior. So by putting in things of self-care is going to be helpful. You know, fresh air, like making sure that we're eating well, we're being around people that make us feel empowered and validated. All of those things are part of our self-care. The more we take care of ourselves to the best of our ability, and we plan for situations that are going to pose as a challenge, which might mean attending a doctor's appointment. It might mean a therapy appointment, or going to work, or volunteering, being around friends or family. All of those things could pose as a challenge. So it's important to have the tools. Do I have, my phone on me to make sure that I have some pictures to look at, or I have something to listen to on my few-minute break to keep me regulated? That would be planning. And sometimes when we're doing something and it's not working, we have to try something new, because that's always in our control. What does it hurt to try something new to see if it can work better for us? A lot of times people set really big goals, which is always great for us to do, but then it's so hard if we're only looking at the bigger goal and not setting the smaller goals, by knowing every goal requires you taking one step at a time. And that step needs to be repeated. So it establishes some type of consistency in your day, and it makes things more manageable. If we say, well, my goal is to never get angry, realistically, that would be very hard for any of us. But if the goal was, I want to manage my anger better, then it would be like, what is the first step I can commit to doing right now? And if that doesn't work and it just didn't work out, try again. That's the beauty of our day. The hours we have, it sets a platform for us to try things more than once. Focusing on things that help your mind and your body feel calm is very important. If someone says to me, I start my day or end my day listening to the news, that's not something I would recommend to help fill your mind with calm. If it's about music, or if it's about, something that's positive to your mind, and that might be listening to the ocean. It could look very different for different people. Listening to a podcast, or just, subjecting yourself to things that ultimately make you feel good, whether you're fully paying attention or it's even on a subconscious level, that you're exposing your mind to things that are going to be helpful and help produce that calm. So when we're looking at ways to reduce stress and anxiety and improve our mood and build up our frustration tolerance, reduce irritability, our coping threshold has to be high enough in order to do that. So no matter where your coping threshold is now, the goal is, what can I do a little bit more to build it up, just so I can tolerate a tiny bit more? That might mean in one particular day, you have to take 10 breaks. It might mean that you need to ask for help. You might need to have more supportive communication with somebody to help you get through that day. All of that is great because it helps and it moves you forward. So, the mindset piece, and in this visual, you'll see sort of that glass, which people have often been exposed to the theory of looking at a glass being half full as opposed to half empty. And one of the things in our mindset work that can be helpful, if you're not someone that, let's say, wants to meditate or do the deep breathing and things like that, is when we're focusing on something that is the opposite of how we're feeling. So if we're feeling angry, frustrated, irritable, anxious, and all of a sudden I ask someone to focus on something that they're grateful for, not positive about, but grateful for, your brain in that moment is not focusing on both thoughts at the same time. It's focusing on the thought that can be more productive, that can help calm the other areas of the brain, that calm the body, that calm the mood, and help you move forward. So the gratitude practice is something that, oftentimes people after an injury will say certain points like, I don't have anything to be positive about. But we can all find something in our day to be grateful for, and that becomes very important. Because otherwise we're only looking at some of the negatives, and the more we are subjecting ourselves to the negatives and incorporating that in our mindset, the harder it is to be in a position to manage our emotions and our mood throughout the day when they change. Okay. So other things to consider is that, how are you expressing your needs? And there can be times where you go to speak and express, and the person that you're speaking to might not have interpreted it correctly, or you feel that they're not understanding. And it's important we find ways that are going to help express what our needs are, because it's ultimately so important, not just to be heard, but to be understood. Because when we're not understood, that can lead to those frustrations and anger. Listening to other people's feedback has to be at the right time for you, which means that if I'm in a position where I'm overwhelmed, highly stressed, and it's hard for me to hear someone else's feedback, even though it could be completely wonderful, it's okay to say, you know what, I do need to hear that, but right now is not the right time. And that leads into asking sometimes for help and making sure there's a plan and support in place that's helpful to you. And no one's a mind reader. So oftentimes support people are trying, or family and friends, but they don't always know what to do. And that can change, because what you need in one context of a situation might change in another. So as much as possible, one of the goals is to prepare for stressful or uncomfortable situations. And how we can do that is, because if we avoid them, they don't get better. We have to build on the ability to expose ourselves little at a time to things that, yes, are uncomfortable. Yes, they might be stressful, but if they're still beneficial and important, then it still needs to be something that we work on. And it might mean that you have these tools with you in your head or on your person, so that you understand, yeah, you know what, no matter what situation I'm going to be put in, I'm going to be able to handle it to the best of my ability. When I talk about providing self-validation, sometimes we look for others to constantly validate, or we have certain expectations of other people, but what about yourself? Are you validating? Are you reviewing the accomplishments that you've done in any given day or any given week? Are you enhancing your motivation ability by not focusing on all of these things didn't go well, so here I am again, a failure, not able to handle the situation, as opposed to, okay, this situation didn't turn out exactly the way I was hoping, but what did I kind of learn from that situation, and what did I do to the best of my ability? The more we validate ourselves, the more it builds up our confidence, the more it builds up our self-worth, and the more confident that we are, the more we can manage. Knowing your limits. So oftentimes someone will say to me, I have very low tolerance, or my limits to handle things is just so profoundly small. And I'm like, okay, let's start from there. And what's something that we can do, one little thing that we can do that you are going to commit to doing that's going to help that situation. And when this leads us into focusing on what are my abilities, and everyone has abilities. We all have strengths. We all have areas. I don't like to say weaknesses. I say areas that we can have benefit from more growth and improvement. And the ability to do these things, we want to do them every day. So, you know, some people, words are hard for them. Communicating, making sure that they can keep their words coming out in the way so that other people hear them. You know, other people have a hard time because they're like, well, this is my goal, but there's no way I can get there. And again, I would challenge that by saying, well, together, how can we figure out a plan with one little baby step to meet that goal? And that's where we build on that internal mental strength, the things that you've had in experiences in your life you've overcome, the challenges, and where you are now. And just because we're at a certain place now, the sky's the limit where you want to set for yourself to go. So, you know, looking ahead, but knowing that the past is not something you can change. The only moment that we have control over doing anything about is right now in this moment. We can want more, we can want better, but that's ultimately based on what we do in this given moment. So some of the things I want to talk about how we can increase tolerance levels is when we look at scenarios or situations or goals, or even it could be your day's routine, it can be demotivating. It can be overwhelming, off-putting at times, depending. But when we start breaking things down into more manageable steps, as an example, it might be someone that has very high anxiety and very high pain, lots of issues, and just getting out of bed, starting their day can be the hardest thing. And then they exhaust very easily. So doing more than a few things in the day become overwhelming because it could lead to pain or mood dysregulation. So that might mean that we have to break things down a bit further and then build from there. So instead of setting sometimes huge steps that I have to do, and if I don't achieve these goals, then it's a disappointment. Let's take a step back. Sometimes taking a step back helps us take a couple steps forward. Acknowledgement about the accomplishments, how far you've come, even in any given day, any given week, is very important, because that's what builds that mental ability to focus more on the I can as opposed to the I can't, because we do want to move forward. We want to try to be a better version of ourselves, whether it's 5 minutes from now or the next day, and every day that we get gives us that opportunity. Now, getting stuck, that's a tricky one, because a lot of people can get stuck. We can all get stuck in moments where we might have some self-deprecating talk, or we just feel like this is too much, just can't manage this, or I just don't want to manage this. But unfortunately, if our thinking stays exactly like that, like nothing's going to help me, nothing's going to change, then we stay exactly where we are. And sometimes that can be comfortable, but we don't want comfort, because comfort at times doesn't lead to growth and progress. By doing one little thing different, or by, looking at something a little bit differently, might pull us out of our comfort zone, but ultimately that's where we know the most growth happens. Now, the beauty of trying again is that if something doesn't work out, let's say, we didn't manage a situation the way we intended, we try. We tried, we acknowledge, hey, I tried. What's something I'm going to do differently the next time? And I'm going to make that better. Because just even having the thought processes, I can try again and I can do better another time, is going to be helpful. And what makes that part helpful too is relying and acknowledging the support around you, because the support around you, whether it's family, friends, support networks, groups, friendships, they're there to help you and have your back. So the more support we have, by feeling, again, understood and heard and appreciated and validated, it allows us to have a greater belief in ourselves. And ultimately, to produce any change, we have to believe a change can happen and that we can make that happen. Now, when we, again, look at some of these tools, I want everyone to know, when, and I know that everyone knows this on maybe a logical level, not necessarily always an emotional level in the moment, is that when our bodies dysregulate, our minds dysregulate, we become angry, frustrated, irritable, maybe inappropriate, whatever happens, we're not controlling what's coming out of our mouths. It doesn't last forever. It does pass. So if we're in any state that's unpleasant and uncomfortable, the one reassurance we want to try to remember is that it does pass. You will ultimately start to feel a bit better. It doesn't happen instantaneously, but it doesn't represent, oh, I just got angry, it's going to last, I'm just going to remain angry now. And one of the ways to help with this is by managing the triggers that I mentioned on the previous slide, some of those examples, because the more we manage our triggers, the goal is it will lessen the intensity of what comes out that we don't want to come out, that's unpleasant. And it's just as unpleasant, obviously, for you as it can be for other people that you don't want that to be projected on. So some of those tools, right? Whether it's, visual reminders, auditory reminders, whether it's writing things out saying, I've got this. Remember, I've accomplished A, B, and C, and reminding yourselves of these things. And when things escalated to a point where, oh, this really wasn't a situation that was in my control, reflect on it. Not in a way to feel shameful or embarrassed, but that didn't go well. First of all, let me look at the factors that could have been contributing to that, and what can I do differently the next time to hopefully lessen that. And there's always going to be ways to reconfigure things for you to handle a situation better. And focusing on things are, again, that mindset piece around what's great about me. Let me focus on the abilities that I have. What am I grateful for? And if I can't find something about myself to be grateful for, what can I find around my environment that I can be grateful for? Because again, that gratitude shifting helps our brain reset. And again, if you want change, change requires change, because otherwise we don't get a different outcome if we're always doing exactly the same thing. And sometimes doing the same thing, even though we want something different, is more comfortable than trying something different and feeling like it's not going to work out. Now, what I wanted to do is I pulled on a few scenarios that might apply to some of you or people that you know. And I wanted to review each scenario and provide a couple strategies based on these scenarios. So this could be a scenario. I'm unmotivated to start my day. The alarm goes off. I don't want to get up and start my day. My mood is low and I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I don't even want to follow what's expected of me. Now, everyone has had points in time where, yeah, this might be relatable to you. If this happens all the time, or even a lot of the time, then we know for this individual, it's going to be very hard for them to make progress that they might want to make. So how does the alarm go off? Is it going off in a beep or something really loud? Or is it going off in a way that's kind of a pleasant wake up? A lot of studies have been shown that that beeping, assertive alarm going off is not necessarily the best way to wake up. It might be something like waking up to your favorite type of music, or waking up to something that's more pleasant. And then once we wake up, especially when we're demotivated, what are we listening to? Are we sitting in silence? Are we listening to someone say, get up, you got to start your day, have your breakfast, take your medication? Or are we starting our first 5-10 minutes of the day where we're subjecting ourselves to something that's calming, that's something that's motivating, and that we're really beginning to focus on gratitude, whatever that might be, so that our mood that already started as a low starts to slowly build up? Because we can't expect from ourselves to have this wonderful ability to regulate throughout the day when our baseline mood has started so profoundly low. So strategies on this scenario would be, I would look at, how is that alarm first going off? What is the first part of your day looking like? What are some self-care components we can put in your day for you that are meaningful? Does that look like fresh air? Does that look like, being around supportive people that you adore? Doing an activity, listening to something, leaving the house. Sometimes people, they feel so confined just being in their space. They need to be in a different space. So we would look at what does that look like for my day? And then if doing that same, let's say, altered routine for 2 to 3 weeks, I then would go back and see, now, how are you feeling? And I would expect that someone wouldn't be in that exact same scenario. No changes are instantaneous. It takes time, and it takes some little bit of discipline to do something repetitively in order to build a certain habit. Because if we just do it once or twice, it doesn't give it enough time to help with a situation. This is another scenario that might be relatable to some people. Dysregulation occurred when I became upset with my partner. I screamed at my partner because I was angry and I didn't feel she understood me, he. Things were hurtful that were said, and now I'm feeling badly. So a lot of times after emotional reactions, the person that's done them can feel terrible. And it lingers. And then that harbors into the mood. And then it also impacts the self-confidence and self-worth to think I can do better. So if someone's aware, yes, I screamed, I yelled, I swore, I said things that were hurtful, and they can acknowledge that. If someone is in that situation, step one is acknowledgement. You don't have to review what you did. It's not meant to make you feel bad. But it's acknowledging what I did. And again, understanding what led me to feeling so angry. Why was I so upset? Was it being overloaded and fatigued and in pain in that moment? What led to that? So that we make sure that the person that it was directed at also understands that. Because not that someone is purposely contributing to being a trigger, but once someone understands a bit better, they can help manage also their responses that could have led to something like that happening. The other thing is when we get to that point, it tells me that if you've screamed and you're completely lost that control, you might have prior to that time needed a bit of a reset, needed a bit of a break, just to make sure that the situation you were in was comfortable enough to be managed at that particular time. Scenario 3, again, lingering effects of how my behavior, my reactions are impacting me. Scenario, I was very uncomfortable at my family dinner. There was too much talking. My head was hurting. I started making comments, made other people upset. So some of those sensory factors, whether the noise and whether just talking, even if it wasn't at you, became a stimulus that was too much to manage. And then you already previously in that day had so many other things going on that you were depleted at that family dinner. So it led to feeling very uncomfortable. What could be done a little bit differently? So that we look at the scenarios that we're going into, and then we're modifying in a way to make sure that, yep, they're manageable for us, and then we can build on that to make them more manageable. Scenario 4, I don't know how to think positively. I'm always focusing on negatives. So this could be relatable. Every time something goes wrong, I can't stop thinking about it, and it discourages me for the next time I'm put in a situation. And therefore, I'm just going to avoid things. So those avoidant tendencies can be a default to some people because sometimes it's easier in our mind to avoid something than try again, then expose ourselves to something that wasn't very pleasant, that was uncomfortable. But here's the thing. That doesn't allow for growth or improvement to be made in situations that are challenging if we never go back to them. But if we go back to them with a little bit of a different mindset, and we go back to them with, again, some strategies that work for us and plan for it, even if we can only handle a situation at first for 5 minutes, that's okay. And we build on it from there. So these examples that could be relatable or not is just to set ultimately, ways in which our behavior, our mood, our emotions, all of these things can change in any given day, any given time. Understanding the complexity behind our behavior helps us also really not take it so personally, and knowing what's contributed to it, and then finding ways to compensate so that we ultimately can have better control over our emotions and our behavior. So this is where that change requires change. If something isn't working, yeah, it's time to make a change. And there's always different and new things to try. And a lot of that means to try and be open to shifting mindset on how you're looking at something, how someone else is looking at something, and ultimately knowing and believing that things absolutely can get better and improve. Even if it feels like it's Groundhog Day, everything, the same kind of scenarios are happening all the time, then that means, okay, what can we do a little bit differently to have a better outcome? Because ultimately, the only thing that you have control over is yourselves. You don't have control over what someone else is going to do or not do, or what the environment's going to look like. And progress starts with that one step, just that one step, and doing the same step until it's comfortable. We don't even notice that step, and then we add another one, and we keep moving forward. So just in review, a few things just to extract from this topic is knowing and acknowledging that managing any emotional state that leads to behavior dysregulation is very challenging. It's not it's complex, it's challenging, but adopting new ways of doing things is necessary, acknowledging that it takes time, and ultimately it takes that practice. Setting those smaller goals, again, breaking it down one step at a time moves us forward. Mindset and the way you see things, or you're willing to be open to seeing things, can ultimately change those perceptions that sometimes can become very rigid. And every day you have provides the opportunity to do differently, try harder, focus on your goals, and again, trying to be that better version of yourself. So that on a whole is the discussion around dysregulation and optimizing our abilities. And now I leave it open to you guys to please feel free to ask any questions and provide any comments that you would like to at this time.